All right, welcome everybody. First off, I want to say thanks for coming out to the Sift farm. It's been my third year out here, so a lot has changed and we're definitely got a lot of different projects going on. First off, I kind of want to explain what the Sift farm is. It stands for Small-Scale Intensive Farm Training, and we kind of use that as a way of doing research of different organic methods that are applied to more of a market gardening setting. And we use that as information to relay back to local producers as well as local gardeners in the area. So a little bit of our challenges in Butte here is, as you guys probably understand a little bit, it has a very unique weather pattern compared to even just Whitehall. We get a little bit more rain than Whitehall, but at the same time, they have a large river, and we get a lot of the cold snaps that set in here really quickly. We typically shoot for about a 70-day growing season between frost, and that's with about an 85% degree we're sure about that. So this year we're sitting around 100 days, and we had our last hard frost about June 11th. And that went down to 25 degrees out here. And we're also looking at that, I think it was September 15th or something like that, we also saw 25 degrees. And so part of what we do to kind of battle that is we work on season extension tools. These hoop houses around here are great for a lot of our crops that we grow that are not frost tolerant. So tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, beans, squash, all of those things are more protected in these hoop houses. And then as well, we have another hoop house back here. The differences between these, basically each one of these probably costs about $1,500 to build yourself. And they protect about 5 degrees air temperature. And so if you think about that, we're about 27 degrees is when we have crop killing frost. But then within that we do row covers, and that can add a few degrees. That's not the best as far as air temperature, but one of the biggest benefits we've had with these is it heats the soil up, so we get a good start to the season a lot earlier. That's one of the biggest benefits. And then as you transitioned over this hoop house back here, which is a little hard to see because the coop's here, we move this coop back and forth with our chickens, and they kind of do our weeding and fertilizing for us. That one is wider, and it gets better airflow during the summer. And that's one of the other big issues we want to talk about, just because the cold is not our enemy necessarily. One of the big things is heat. So you start creating an oven, at this elevation during the summer. We got, 3 months to grow, and so one of our big things is we're always having shock to our plants with the heat and the cold, and the heat and the cold. So our yields are not nearly as high as some of the other valleys. So this one actually vents out air quite a bit better, and as well it has a layer on top that we pump air into, and that allows for an extra layer of insulation. That one usually we can get down to about 22 degrees without having any frost killing the plants. So there's been big benefits from that, but at the same time it's more about the variability in the climate. That's something we can't predict, and so that's why we just expect for the worst. So out here is where all the stuff is that is frost tolerant, and we have a crop rotation system, so everything always gets transferred one way or the other. The only thing blocking us up is we had a perennial strawberry bed here for a while, so we're still kind of reworking things with that. Another way we deal with the weather is timing. We start growing in March, mid-March. That's when we start all of our tomatoes and peppers, our longer yielding to maturity vegetables. And what I've come to find is if you start too early, you are going to run into a lot of problems. For instance, this year I transferred some lettuce out here, and 3 weeks later I direct seeded. Well, the direct seeded lettuce overtook the other one. So there is a true limit to what we can start with here. And I get the question all the time, like, well, why don't you start earlier? You have these greenhouses. And the truth is root balling happens. You get all kinds of nutrient depletion, and especially when you have them in their own pots. So those are some of the issues that we deal with. So another one is selecting of varieties. So we typically select varieties that are within 70 days of maturity, kind of just because that's our window. Every time you transfer a plant, it takes a hit. So we're really working on trying to find out how early we can start which plants and which plants are going to work well in certain areas. Most of the varieties we've selected, we always compare against others. We have a strong goal of selecting seeds from Montana, so we're trying to transition, but at the same time we like to compare varieties from other regions too. So, we'll be taking Northwest and New England varieties and test them against things that are grown in Montana and see what works from Montana grown in Butte. So it's a big challenge we have. I kind of talked about the heat issue. I found that we have a huge issue with bolting. A lot of times we are growing cold season vegetables in the middle of the summer because that's our window and we're forced to do that. So I've actually been looking at more heat resistant to bolting varieties. So for instance, there's a Nero Tondo radish. It's a black radish. Very spicy actually, but we had huge success with that because come the middle of summer, I mean, if you guys experienced at all this summer, we went from winter to 100 degrees throughout the entire summer and no rain, nothing. So we had a big issue with that, and not to mention all the smoke in the sky. So we're also looking at those different situations. The same goes for things like bok choy. We have a big issue with some of the varieties bolting, so we kind of selecting varieties based off of what works and what tastes best, because that's the other big half of it. We're challenged with building a local food system in Butte, which never has really taken to the idea. It's more of a meat potatoes kind of place, and so we're really trying to push local produce and trying to get people interested and on board with our initiative. So. I also want to take you guys into the greenhouse and kind of show you some of our other projects. Yeah, I want to talk about some of our goals for sustainability. Sustainability is kind of a broad term, and so I like to define my goals at least. One of my big goals is environmental sustainability. We really want to make sure that we're not, using petrochemicals, we're not having all kinds of additives of fertilizers and such, pollutants and stuff. So we do not use any of that out here, as well as we're looking at conserving water, electricity, all those other things. Water is probably our highest utility, and so we really look at that. We have very minimal electrical usage around here. As far as machinery, we have a very limited amount and lots of hand tools, so that's not really one of our biggest issues, but working on water and trying to think about how we can retain the water in the soil and keep soil fertility going for us, so we're not really playing the game of what type of watering system works the best, but how can the soil do the work for us. So that's one of the things where we really look at different cover crops and as well as supplying our own amendments. So we used to go and buy topsoil and compost to try to amend our soils, but we've turned that into full production on our own scale. So we have our our community composting going on, where anybody in the community can come in. Large events like this, we'll be collecting the compost and using it, and then as well as biochar. We've been doing a little bit of study into biochar. It's an interesting concept. It's not a fertilizer, and really what it does is the carbon that you break down is the house for all the biotics in there. So we're really looking at bacteria and the fungi count in the ground. So we use a couple different methods to look at that. Haney test is a good method. It kind of gives you a level of the organic matter and the fungal count and stuff like that. So what we're doing is we're making our own biochar. It's just started kind of, but when I first came here I thought it was a stove. Cooked on it a few times until I figured out what it was really for. But basically we're getting to the point where we're trying to figure out, in comparison to products out on, commercial products out there, what can we make and is it as successful and what can the benefits be? Biochar is not something you need to add to your soil continuously. It's really just to get that house in there for the biotics to live in, and then you create the fungal count and the bacteria. So one of the things about biochar is if you add that directly into the ground, you can have quite mixed results, I guess. pH can be an issue. It can actually lock nutrients out from the soil. And so what the important part is to use it as the house for the culture. So the way I think of it is the compost is the yogurt. It's the probiotic. So we use, with the compost and the biochar, we mix it together. There's also different methods. You can add flour, you can add some warm compost, basically, things that are still actively cooking. And then you basically are able to inoculate the biochar before you use it as an amendment. So that's another thing we're looking at, as well as different methods of making biochar. This biochar kiln back here is built on a rocket stove method, and its purpose is to use a lot less combustion of wood to create the final product. And so we're going to be looking at a couple different methods of creating biochar so that we can see what is more effective. I mean, there's a lot of scrutiny about biochar. More combustion, more release of carbon dioxide and stuff. How can that be sustainable? And in no way are we saying that this is an answer for large scale farming, but for small scale, it could be, especially drought. Places that see a lot of drought, we're trying to look at ways to create more fertile soils to hold that moisture into the ground and wick it in too. I've redefined what weeds are in my own books. Anything that's growing on the ground is better than nothing growing on the ground. And so we're really looking at that, using cover crops, mulching techniques, and really just allowing the water to wick into the ground and get stored in there. So yeah, we'll move into the greenhouse. You guys make it in? Can you hear me back there? So these are some projects that we work in our greenhouse. This is where we do all of our plant starts, as well as we do microgreens to extend our season. Another way we look at sustainability is risk management, and so we really try to have year-round income of some sort. Obviously, it's really hard. At some point, these greenhouses have been freezing on us, and we cannot get full year-round growth in here. And then we also have a greenhouse over there that we get a little bit more of our season out of. We can typically start seeding in there in February, and it's a lean-to onto the actual building, so we get the insulation from the building. But in here, we can typically hold more than 15 degrees above the temperature outside, and so when we're stuck seeing negative temperatures for a week, we will fall below freezing in here, and without minimal added heat, which we really try not to do. We're not trying to input large amounts of heat or anything like that. Greenhouse is built for winter growing. In fact, we had a bit of an issue, and so this top layer had to get another layer of Solex up there so that we could get summer light, because otherwise everything becomes really leggy and tries to reach for the light. We wanted to play around with the hydroponics idea, so we have this system that we built. One of my issues about hydroponics is I don't really think that the nutrient solutions are necessarily sustainable. I try to stay away from commercial products. So we have 2 different reservoirs at work, and we've tested different methods. And one of the most interesting things this year is we've actually been able to get off of the commercial products, and we only use our Compost Teas. So we are taking our compost, we are running it through there. It drips through 3 layers. We have worms in there, so we're getting the worm castings and everything, and as it drips through that, we usually run about 2 or 3 times through there. But what you get is, this basically a steeped version of compost, and the biggest issue with that is if you don't get enough oxygen in there, it goes to anaerobic, and you end up with all kinds of root problems, and that's why we just have basically a simple air stone in there. We run air through there for 24 hours, and then we can add it into here. And other than a few little, we add just a few little things to balance it out. Sometimes some root guard to make sure that we can balance the bacteria on the root. But for the most part, it's been very, very interesting, and we've actually been successfully to get off of there, because I would love to do more of an aquaponics. I know, especially out in Livingston, they do lots of really interesting projects out there, and they even use the trout. So trout work better in a colder water, so that's a very that's one good aspect for it. But we can't really, I guess, justify it if we can't grow year-round here. What do you do with the fish afterwards and such like that? So we're still working on another problem in this greenhouse specifically, and that's in the summer it becomes an oven. So we're still working on different venting ideas and stuff like that to really flush the hot air out. But for the most part, this has been a little sanctuary for us to really start our plants early in the season, and a little extra added income late into the season. So that's where we are with this part. So
how is this funded?
This project, we are funded through ATRA, mostly. ATRA is a kind of a feedback from NCAT that gives information to different farmers across the country. So it's a call service, as well as we have publications that are written by sustainable ag specialists across the country. So we have people out in New England, Arkansas, California, Texas, and so we kind of just adjust those calls to people from more of those regional areas.
So Montana Tech doesn't have them?
No. Yeah. Well, we have looked into different ways to partner with them, especially with remediation and stuff like that. Robert Powell, I believe, is the professor up there, and he has done great work with the greenhouse up there, but more of a focus for remediation of, minelands and stuff like that. So. And then I guess the last part, I'll just kind of filter through here. So this is the other side of the room, and this is where we do most of our plant starts. But as well, we're kind of working on propagating off of our own strawberries. So we take the runners, we put them into little pots, and as soon as they start taking root, we'll cut them off and we'll kind of expand them. So I'm trying to get these in the ground to be dormant for next year's growth. And this was the last year we were working with Montana State on this specific project, but we were doing a study on perennial production of strawberries versus an annual production. So a matted row system versus just a simple one where you come in the fall, you plant the strawberries and they overwinter, and then you get the berries and then you turn them back in your crop rotation. And the idea is to kind of see how you can fit into a crop rotation strawberry production when a lot of the negative effects are depleting nutrients and weeds. Weeds are a huge one. It is very hard to maintain a strawberry plot for, year after year without, the proper weed management tools, such as, lining the ground and stuff like that. So that's one thing we've been looking at. We also have our rotation of basil and stuff that we'll put into our hydroponics, so we're starting new plugs in here. And then I'm also getting started our rotation of microgreens, which microgreens are a really great thing for doing year-round. They are very iffy, especially with water. You want to give them a lot of water at first, but then you want to really tone that back, because you can easily, with this type of matted leaf layer, you get lots of mold and stuff in there. So we looked at ways of watering from the bottom. We've also looked at, what kind of nutrients do you need? So this is all just peat moss. We've kind of come off of any type of potting soil. It's expensive to continuously do it, and you don't want to be reusing it for those, obvious pathogen and pest problems that can be happening. This is an example of poor germination, but what happened is over the summer, or over the weekend, just the high heat, it really just only certain places germinated. So it's something that is best germinated almost inside, and then you can put it in out here, but we work around different places. In fact, most of the time I just grow in the south-facing window, and you can get quite a good year-round production of microgreens, which are great nutrient source, and depending on what you grow, you can get quite a bit of money. Some people sell $15 to $20 just per flat, and depends on what you grow. Different herbs warrant that. I grow typically some pretty simple things, and I also really focus on pea shoots and sunflower shoots. Those are a good addition as well to our mixes. So, you guys have any questions?
So what's your degree in?
Agricultural economics.
Really?
At Colorado State University. Yeah. So
how did it bring you here?
Oh, well, my girlfriend got into tech. She's a hydrogeologist for the DEQ now, and so I came up here, and I think like some of us, we're really lucky to have an ag job in Butte. So it's really, we're really fortunate. So. I also lived and worked on a small sustainable farm in Steamboat Springs. I lived in a sheep shed for a summer at least, so that's kind of where my passion for it came, and so getting back into it was really
And
great.
in that sheep shed, they were growing things instead of having sheep? Or they had sheep?
No, it was a glorified bunker. I don't know exactly how to put it, but so. Anybody else have any other questions?
Do you publish your findings in a way that we can use in our own practices?
Well, a lot of the...
Can't hear the question, so.
The question is, do we publish our findings? Yes, we do. A lot of the research across NCAT nationally has a lot of those, especially on our website through ATRA and stuff. You can find a lot of those publications and research. I have certain things that I've been working on, and I don't think that they've been fully published yet, but we are definitely looking at getting those out there. Yeah.
What about marketing? How do you market things?
Marketing, yeah, it's a really good question. Butte's been a bit of it's been an uphill battle, I'd have to say. We have had some pretty good luck with certain markets. I've kind of transitioned a little bit more to private caterers and such. I have built our own markets. We do a farm stand out here, and for the most part, that took care of the majority of our sales. We were really successful with that. And then as well, we kind of partnered with Headframe Spirits, and Headframe Spirits has allowed me to set up a vending table in there. And it was great because rain or shine, they don't close. So it's really nice to have something that I can guarantee a place to sell vegetables. We've looked into getting into a lot of restaurants around here. We've had a little bit of success. Places like Bread Underground, they'll use a lot of my herbs. They make soups and stuff with our vegetables. And then for the most part, that's been about all of our sales right there. We've really wanted to work with a couple other restaurants, but it's hard to get them to work on fluctuating menus. It's been a big issue for us. They're kind of stuck on their ways, and it's hard to get people to start thinking about different ways to use vegetables or different vegetables to use. I mean, that's why I prefer one of the caterers I go with, because I can just let him loose on the farm. He'll go take parsnip greens, he'll get cilantro roots, things that I can't necessarily market, and find really good use for that. So that's a big step forward for us.
So what is the total sales, do you think, in a year?
Our total sales, typically we're about $5,000. It's not that much, but we're really working on covering all of our input costs, and so that's the biggest thing. We're also minimizing our input costs, so that line gets fluctuated a little bit. So, yeah. Any other questions?
You think about implementing like a CSA at all then?
I did one CSA. I wanted to guarantee that I could actually have the product for it. So it was someone I knew, someone who I could work with. But even that, I mean, it's hard. At the beginning of the season, when you have leafy greens and green onion and not a large variety of vegetables, it's hard to get people to jump into that. But yeah, I mean, that would be really beneficial, especially when we get down to higher yields and such like that. But yeah, and having people that aren't picky, that's the thing. That's the biggest thing about CSA. Is one of the biggest complaints I've heard is like, oh, I don't know what to do with this and this and this. Now I have to go to the grocery store and buy different things to make it work. So I've kind of worked on packaging those things that go well together, and I think that might be something to work with. But yeah, that's a good question.
And so does any of it go to the schools at all?
No? All the stuff that I've kind of just showed to you does not. It is more of the Sift project for regaining input costs and such like that. But the rest of the area, and I think Andrew's going to talk about that too as well, is kind of more of a partnership with Food Corps, YMCA's out there growing, food banks out there, and they have stuff. And so together with all of that, some of it does go out there. And anything extra and stuff we donate.
My name's Andrew Coggins. I'm the Sustainable Project Coordinator for Montana at NCAT here in Butte. And my primary role really is to support John with the vegetable production and planning that you've just seen around the area. Also to roll forward with new projects, and also to roll forward with getting new funding opportunities and talking with other organisations to get research equipment, etc. moving forward. So the first project, or one of the first projects we're involved with, we're standing in now, which is looking a little bit sad as it closes up for winter, but this is now a fruit tree area just here. And if we work from left to right across there, the ones on my extreme right are Nanking Cherries. Now Nanking Cherries themselves are fairly native to Montana now. They can be got from the Missoula Conservation Agency for next to no dollars. And the only reason we put them in there is we have a base against which to measure new varieties coming out. The next variety alongside is called Carmine Jewel, and that's a bush cherry. And like a lot of these new varieties now, this has come from Saskatchewan. It's a Zone 3 / Zone 2 plant. We're not going to mulch them during the winter, and I'll explain that in a minute of why. But being a Zone 3 / Zone 2 plant, they'll be fine as they are. The main reason for bringing these new varieties is to actually increase yield on them, and also to increase sweetness with some of these fruits. A lot of these fruits that grow in Montana, you'll notice, are quite bitter and primarily used for cooking and preserving as opposed to eating. And the other reason they research these fruits is yield. So we've had a speculative figure that probably in 4 or 5 years growth, these things will produce in between 6 and 15 pounds of fruit per bush, which at the minute is research, but will feed into the farmers' markets and everything else we service with the vegetables that you've seen across the middle there. These two sets of guides, rows 3 and 4 here, these are actually honeyberries, and rather than getting new varieties of cherries in, we're actually getting now new species into Montana. The precipitation, despite the weather today, is actually very low on an average year, 12 to 14 inches. And we've already mentioned the frost that can come very late in the season and start very early towards winter too. So even though you'll see a lot of these fruits being grown, say, in Corvallis, in the Bitterroot Valley, you actually have a look at the Bitterroot Valley specs, the altitude, the climate. So we're quite justified, and we feel quite justified in growing these varieties here too, to test in this particular climate. Any questions on the fruit particularly? We're not going to mulch them, no. We've actually had advice not to mulch them, simply because they're cold hard enough as they are. And if you mulch them, you might actually encourage insect pests around the root systems and the stem. So we're literally taking them as they're seen on the packet. These things are supposed to survive severe winters, so they will be left as they are to survive severe winters. Yeah. I'm sorry?
Consistent snow cover? You have consistent like snow cover?
It depends very much on the year. It's to a degree it's the same with frost, and it's if you get the snow cover first and then you get the frost, the snow kind of acts as a thermal blanket. If you get the frost first and then the snow on top, it's the complete opposite. It causes immense problems. If that answers the question, yeah. But snow here in Butte is not consistent usually. I mean, it stays on the ground for weeks on end, but not in a complete pattern from, say, October through to February, March time, you know, yeah.
Get a lot of deer?
We don't at the minute, no, but the more interesting we get, the more deer we will probably get visiting us. The area behind us, for anyone that doesn't know, is actually a water catch. It's not us, it's Butte Silverburn. It's a water catchment area. Primarily for the water coming down off the mountains and the interstate, etc. I would explain why we actually go past our resident livestock too, that was a little bit of a misnomer on there, and that the livestock, we do have livestock in here. They're not ours, they belong to an NCAT colleague of ours. And we bring them in 2 or 3 to 4 times a year to actually graze specific areas of the farm that you see, and the 2 acres over the far side there. So we don't technically have them here, but we do get livestock in here. We just have the chickens here full time. if we can just go now around the edge of the chickens to the other area. Point where we're suffering temporary hypothermia out here, just saying, we'll crawl a hole and dive into a greenhouse somewhere. Long story short, where the fruit trees were on the other side is cover crop beyond it. And that cover crop next year will be more fruit trees. But basically the cover crop on that side is the same as the cover crop we had grown on this side. It's an 8 species cover crop with legumes, brassicas and grasses within the mix as well. There's several reasons for that. One that sparked our interest initially with this is that if you start to go across Montana and you visit people like Gabe Brown, for instance, in Dakota, and his holistic farming, where people are actively growing cover crops, the 8 species of different varieties do various things to the soil, but at its most basic, 8 species give you insurance protection. But if 2 fail, as 2 did here this year, I think it was Phacelia and millet, you've still got 6 species working to benefit the soil. So this is becoming more and more popular. In years past, on the Sift farm here, they've used single species and double species cover cropping, either Phacelia, cereal rye, vetch, in 2 or 3 combinations. But now moving forward, we're trying to mimic what's happening across the wider state and across the wider area. The other reason we're doing 8 species cover crops here is that we're trying to illustrate everything that all the benefits that cover crops bring to soils. And we start with things like improvement of organic matter, improvement of soil structure, improvement of water retention, improvement of water infiltration, weed suppression. So we've perhaps gone a little bit overboard here, but we're trying to demonstrate to everyone all the advantages of cover crop covering in one area. Just the other day we did soil infiltration tests here as well. Soil infiltration tests, you can look them up anyway, they're very, very, very simple. You just have a tube and you pour water into the centre of that tube and you measure the time it takes for the water to dissipate from the tube into the ground. We pour one set of water in first to get the ground saturated. We pour a second set of water into a pre-described measurement and take the time it takes for the water to dissipate through the soil. And that gives you your soil permeability, as you